Welcome to a new episode of These Go to 11. Let's turn it up. Hey everybody, welcome back to These Go to 11, an unchurchy conversation about everyday faith. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and review on your favorite podcast platform. This not only helps us to get our content out there, but also helps us to find out what you, our faithful listeners, think. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell. Joining me as always, Greg Dutcher. Greg, what's going on, man?
Not much, Nathan. I am, if I get my voice here going, I'll be really excited. I'm excited because we have a very, very special guest.
Yes.
So I'm not going to do all my usual useless banter when people hear our guest speak. They'll be like, why am I listening to Dutcher?
Our listeners might go up.
Yeah. Wait, somebody more than my mom? So we'll get somebody else besides my mom,
yes,
to listen into the podcast. Kidding, of course. We love our listeners, and new and old, and those that are, weighing their options. But I know for a fact once people hear our guest, they'll say, boy, I wish Dutcher didn't waste 10 minutes at the beginning talking about what the Orioles or whatever else. Yes, cheesesteak subs and all that. So.
Yeah, we're going to get right into it. And
yes.
So I do want to introduce Dr. Thomas Schreiner. He is the James Harrison Professor of New Testament Interpretation at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He holds a Master of Divinity and Master of Theology from Western Conservative Baptist Seminary and a PhD from Fuller Theological Seminary. He's published a number of articles and book reviews in scholarly journals, as well as commentaries, books, and anything else you can think of. Dr. Schreiner, we are so pleased to have you joining us, so thankful for your time. How are you doing today?
Yeah, it's great to be with you. I'm doing well. Our semester's over, so I'm teaching a class in a week or two, but yeah, it's nice. It's a beautiful day here in Kentucky, so it's a blessing.
Very nice, very nice. I wanted to ask you about that, Dr. Schreiner. How long have you been at Southern now?
Yeah, 27 years.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Since 1997. So yeah.
Wow, what a track record! I know Southern has produced so many pastors, missionaries, scholars, theologians that serve the church. Can I ask? Do you ever have children of former students that come back or join on for the first time? Because 27 years might be enough to make that happen.
Yeah. In fact, I think my first PhD student graduated, and then I had his son as a PhD student.
Wow.
So, and they're both, and what's fascinating is the father is pastoring in Louisville, and his son is pastoring in nearby Indiana.
So, how about
that's
that?
Neat.
That's got to be a thrilling feeling for you, I would imagine, Dr. Schreiner.
It is great. Oh, it's great. I don't think I'll have the next generation. That's not going to work. So.
That's right. Say, yes. And your son is also quite the scholar, is he not?
Yeah, my son Patrick teaches at Midwestern, and actually Patrick is publishing at a pace that's far outstrips mine.
Wow.
So we'll see what the Lord continues to do, but it's not a race or a contest, right? But it's great to see how productive he's been and writing good and thoughtful books. And yeah, he loves what he does, and it's a sister seminary, so it's a thrill to have him, there.
I love it. So you get to touch the next generation, but it's also in your own family as well, which has got to be wonderful. So notice, Nathan, we're in trouble when Dr. Schreiner says, I don't publish as much as he does, because I think in the last week I posted one thing on Facebook, and I did at Towson, where I teach public speaking, put something on the community board. So that's been my scholarship for the past, year? So we are, Nathan and I are thinking, we're a little behind that pace.
Right.
Just a little bit, right, Nathan? But no, it's when we've had you on in the past, because what did we say,
2016, I think it was.
Which it was hard to believe.
I know.
But, the first version of the podcast that started a year or so before that, if I remember rightly, I think we had Dr. Schreiner on twice, if not 3 times.
I think you might be right. Because I believe one of the times we had you on, Dr. Schreiner, we were discussing was it a debate that you had with John Piper about the view of, was it Romans?
Romans 7?
I think so.
Yeah. Right.
I think you're right. I do remember talking about that and the way to approach Romans 7.
Yes.
Post conversion, that sort of thing. We don't expect you to remember, Dr. Schreiner, us in light of the number of platforms that you are regularly on. But for us,
I do remember that discussion with John, though. Yeah.
Yes. And I remember, Nathan and I have been geeking out all week. Oh, what do we ask Dr. Schreiner? So we're going to talk what, Nathan? Revelation.
Yeah, we are going to talk Revelation, which, Greg, I'm going to throw you under the bus a little bit here, because this is a book I've been with our church now for, I think Joy and I were talking, it's been 12, 13 years now, I think.
Sounds
it is something
about right.
like that. And I have not heard you once preach through the book of Revelation.
I'm getting exposed here.
You've definitely pulled things out of Revelation and have used it in as part of the greater part of sermons that you've preached in the past. So it's not like you never touch on the book,
right?
But in terms of teaching through a book, that is one that you have chosen to omit in your book teaching,
yes,
for some personal reasons, and I think we're going to get into some of that today, and maybe Dr. Schreiner will encourage you as to why you should get in it and teach it.
Yes. Well, you know what? Watch how I pivot, and I'll ask Dr. Schreiner this directly. Dr. Schreiner, have you, in a preaching capacity, preached a sub-series on the book of Revelation in a church setting before? I don't think I know that.
Yes, I did. I was the preaching pastor for 17 years at a church here in town. And I did. I preached through Revelation sometime in the first decade of the 2000s. I don't remember the exact, but I love doing it. And actually, my interest in Revelation is fundamentally pastoral. I think it's a book. I think it's a book we need to hear, and I think it's very practical.
Woo! Now the challenge is all, Nathan. I was hoping, Dr. Schreiner, you would say, no, I've never preached it. Don't worry about it. A running joke I have when people ask is, we've preached through. Yeah, we're going through Mark's gospel right now. In other capacities, I've done John, several other letters, Joshua, Judges, Jonah, Ruth. Yeah, there's several books that we've taken on, Romans. And I always say, so the last books, if the Lord gives me enough life, this is always what I say I'll do, I'll do Leviticus, Revelation, and then Song of Songs. So it's sort of people know, in other words, Dutcher, you're never going to preach it. So why don't we start there? Could you elaborate a little bit more? Let me preface this by saying this, Dr. Schreiner. I have not done it, but I'm very open to a personal, professorial, pastoral challenge, whatever category we put it on from you, to do it. I've not done it because I have found that the expectations, our congregation is a non-denominational church, kind of, for lack of a better term, generic evangelical. You might say like an E-free church without being even E-free. So we're kind of right, standard in the middle of the theological evangelical spectrum. And I recognize a number of people probably bring expectations to the book, such as, wow, now we're going to get really nitty-gritty about what's going on in the Middle East. Now we're going to get nitty-gritty about the upcoming election. Now we're going to understand, world conspiracies and Illuminati. I might overthink that, but as a result, I've not ever tackled it in a preaching series. I've done the letters in chapter 2 and chapter 3, which a lot of preachers do. I've done several things on Revelation 5, such a grand vision of, from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Some things from 21 and 22 on the new heavens, the new earth, what's awaiting us. So all that to say, Dr. Schreiner, can you tell us, when you say out of pastoral concern, could you speak to that? Because I'm all ears, why it would be helpful to churches to hear preaching from Revelation.
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is there might be some wisdom in delaying when to preach on Revelation for pastors for various reasons. You don't want to preach on it if you're a relatively new pastor and it'd be divisive. It is interesting, John Calvin didn't write a commentary on Revelation. He did every other book of the New Testament.
Yes. I often quote that in my defense. But yes.
So I don't, if somebody hasn't preached on Revelation, yet, right? I don't think that's necessarily an indictment. But I would say, if the congregation is mature enough and they're ready, I think it's good for them to hear, first, the fundamental way to interpret the book is not via the newspaper. Newspaper eschatology is the wrong way to go. The reason people have a hard time understanding Revelation is because we don't know the Old Testament. We don't know the whole Bible. Because the Old Testament, because Revelation is filled really from the beginning to the end with allusions to the Old Testament. So I want to teach my people how to read the Bible. And Revelation's a great book to do that because it's the climax of the whole Bible. So that's one reason. But secondly, Revelation is about a great battle. We're in a cosmic conflict. We're in a war. There's a war between good and evil, between God and Satan, between the world and believers. And so Revelation, I don't think it's not fundamentally about date setting. It's about the temptation of believers to, in the midst of a conflict, to compromise. And of course, you preach to those letters, but this is the issue throughout the book. The world presses on us and makes life hard, and then the temptation of believers is to give in and to compromise in places we shouldn't compromise, so that our lives can be happier here on earth. And that's what John's worried about. Is our allegiance to the world or is it to Christ? So what are some of the major themes in the book? Well, God's sovereignty, right? God rules. The cross of Christ. The cross of Christ, you mentioned chapter 5, chapter 1, chapter 7, chapter 12. The key to history is the cross and the resurrection of Christ. So I always say to the students, look, Revelation's about God as the sovereign creator, and he deserves all the glory and honor. Christ is our redeemer through his death. And so then the book is a call to endure, because we have the hope that ultimately God will triumph in Christ over all our foes. So that's a very practical word. We're called upon to endure, because life as a Christian, it can be hard. Now, I would just say in Revelation, it's probably not a lot of people were being put to death, but some were. Now that's not happening in our country right now, right? But the world's still pressing against us.
Yes. No, that's really helpful to hear you emphasize that. In that sense, I see it's always timely, because we're always going against the tide as we follow Christ's call. So I see that. I'm trying to think how to approach this, Dr. Schreiner. What table setting do you have to do? For instance, in my context, I think there's an expectation. I'm saying these things carefully because one of the things that Nathan and I both love about your scholarship is the spirit of humility that you bring. And I've heard you address other theological camps, people with different theological distinctions in such a careful and sensitive way, which we love. But a number of people in our church, and I know a lot of you are listening and saying, what is Greg talking about? Well, I'm going to say it now, have been influenced, and maybe somewhat unknowingly, by a very dispensational tone when it comes to matters of the end times. And just for those listening in, that might be writers like Tim LaHaye, I know he's passed on, and the Left Behind series, right? Those old movies, Nathan, we always talk about Thief in the Night, those things. Many people bring certain expectations. So whenever I've addressed eschatology or end times in general, Dr. Schreiner, my wife always comes to my defense. People ask me questions about the Antichrist. What do I think about what's happening in, with the, Palestinian-Israeli conflict right now from an end times perspective? And my wife, Lisa, will say, I'm just warning you all, you're going to find Greg's response very boring. So she tries to do a little preliminary work to soften the blow, but because Revelation, there was a commentary out years ago. Why am I blanking on it? You would know, Dr. Schreiner. That sort of, it's in 4 columns. There are 4 views. I can't remember the editor.
Oh yeah, right.
But remember, it was like historicist, preterist, futurist, idealist, or symbolic. It seems like the preacher, the teacher, has to communicate a framework. There's so many pre-decisions that have to be maybe announced, understood. I'm curious how you dealt with that, which will get us, of course, into talking about your unique views of the book of Revelation. Anything I said there, do you want to take a shot at, Dr. Schreiner?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing, I think it's really, well, it always depends on your audience, right? But in my experience, now there are exceptions. If you're in a church where there's a very set view, understanding of Revelation, and you go against that, maybe we use wisdom, right? Yeah. Maybe is it the time to do it? But I have found in my experience, if I say, look, this book is really debated, and there are different readings. There's dispensational readings. There's amillennial, premillennial, postmillennial readings. All those readings are within orthodoxy. All those readings are possible. We extend charity and love. We're not going to divide over this. I'm going to tell you how I read this text, and you evaluate it. But you don't have to agree with me. And I'm not even giving the official position of the church. Because we don't have an official eschatological position.
Yes, we don't either. Yeah.
Except for that Jesus is coming again.
Yes.
And the righteous will be in the new creation forever, and the wicked will suffer eternal conscious punishment in hell. I mean, we hold those views. But yeah, my experience is that people find that refreshing. I have so many people come up to me and say, I have never heard that there's more than one possible view. I've just heard growing up that there's one view, and it's the view of the preacher preaching.
Yes.
Now that doesn't mean I don't tell them my view. I do, and I defend it. And I say, this is what I think it says. But I think that can take a lot of pressure off. The only context that doesn't work is if you're talking to a large group who hold a definite view and even saying that offends them. Then I would just say, again, you as a pastor or a teacher, you have to decide, are they ready to, if I don't agree with that set view, are they ready to hear from me? Because it's probably not worth dividing a church over it, I don't think. So if you realize, this is going to be very super divisive and people are going to get really upset, I wouldn't go there, maybe pull the John Calvin, right?
Right. Right.
But then secondly, the other thing I'd love to do is, sometimes people say to me, we should take Revelation literally, as literally as possible. And I'll say, but the book's symbolic, right? There's a lot of symbols. So the first question I always ask them is, so a literal in Revelation 13, the great enemy of God's people, is right. Everybody knows that's a symbol. So then I want to say, so we've already all agreed there's symbolism in the book. Now the question is, what is symbolic and what the symbol is and what it symbolizes? Nobody believes Satan is literally a dragon, right? But he's called a dragon. But there's a reason he's called a dragon, right? So everyone agrees that there's symbolism. And I like to look at that first vision of Christ in chapter 1. Does he really have bronze legs? Does he really have a double-edged sword in his mouth? Are his eyes really glowing like lighted up coals? Does he literally have white hair? No, I've never had anyone disagree with me as I march through it and I show them what's going on. I think this is clearly symbolic, isn't it? And so I think that's a huge step because, a lot of people, they've never just really read it. And if you're reasonable and charitable, they're open, Yeah. But, does he literally, you preach through, Greg, the 7 churches, is he literally going to hand you manna?
Right.
At the
right.
I mean, and a white stone, you're like, wait, well, I've always really wanted a white stone,
Right.
Obviously, I think everybody would agree those are symbols of something. So that I think is the key hermeneutical move. Once you agree it's symbolic, what's the referent to the symbols and why? And you can make a lot of progress once we agree on that. I mean, there's still going to be disagreements. When I preached to it, there are people in our church who disagreed with me, but they were charitable.
Oh, that's good.
That's great. So Dr. Schreiner, I wanted to ask you, Greg and I, a couple months ago, we did a podcast on the major end times positions and really just kind of defining them for our listeners, what those look like. And then Greg was talking to me, and you have a position that I'm unfamiliar with, and I would think that our listeners are unfamiliar with it too, and wondering if you could explain what it is, and that is new creation millennialism.
Yes, I'm happy to explain it. So this isn't, I'm sure you talked about before premillennialism, amillennialism, and postmillennialism.
Yes. Yeah.
New creation millennialism is a kind of via media between the amillennial and premillennial position, but let me just explain it. Now, I think I'm going to start with a general comment. I prefer it. I think it solves some weaknesses in both the premillennial and amillennial position. So let me just say as a side note, I really respect postmillennialists. but I'm exegetically, theologically, I've never found postmillennialism at all compelling. So I'm happy to talk about postmillennialism, but because I've never been persuaded by it, and I argue against it in my commentary, I'm not talking about that right now. Mm-hmm. But I think the major weakness with the historic premillennial view is Jesus, at the end of Revelation 19, he returns on the white horse and he judges and slays all the wicked. Mm-hmm. But if he judges and slays all the wicked, and the saints at his second coming, the believers, are raised from the dead, then who goes into the millennium in an unglorified body for the premill view?
Yes.
Now, the premillennialists have various attempts to explain that, but I think it's extremely difficult. So that's the first point I want to make. I think the problem with the amillennial view, and by the way, I've held all these views.
Yes, me too. Yes.
The problem with the amillennial view is I'll just stick to one main problem. I think it's very unlikely that the first resurrection is the intermediate state. So that's what Meredith Kline and Greg Beale, who I greatly respect, argue. But here, first of all, that word anastasis everywhere else, which is the word for resurrection, means a physical resurrection. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I think if we just think of it theologically, Revelation 20 is talking about the vindication of the martyrs. Mm-hmm. I think it's first of all, the meaning of the word resurrection, I think it's physical. But secondly, I think it's very unlikely that vindication is the intermediate state in heaven instead of the physical resurrection of the dead. If you read the rest of the New Testament hardly ever talks about the intermediate state. It's there. I believe in it. But it is never viewed as the vindication of the saints. It's viewed, the intermediate state is viewed as a temporary period where you're waiting for your full redemption. So I think it's much more likely, because of the meaning of the word anastasis and the theology of the New Testament, that the vindication of the saints in Revelation 20 is the physical resurrection. So what am I arguing? When Jesus returns the millennium at the end of Revelation 19, when he binds Satan, when the saints are resurrected, that is the beginning of the millennium, but it's also the beginning of the new creation. In other words, the millennium and the new creation overlap in time. Therefore, all the wicked have been judged or destroyed or slain. Satan is bound for 1,000 years, and the righteous are on a new earth, the new heavens and new earth. They're in the new creation, but that new creation is also the millennium. Maybe it's a literal 1,000 years. Maybe it's a symbolic period of time. So far, so good.
Yeah.
What I have to explain is the attack. After 1,000 years, Satan is released, and then we have another resurrection, a physical resurrection. I believe that physical resurrection, along with many interpreters, is the resurrection of the wicked. So they've been slain, but now they're raised from the dead. They join Satan in an attack on the saints in the new creation. And as we know, that attack is thwarted. Now, let me consider a couple of objections. One objection is, what's the point of attacking people in the new creation if the attack cannot succeed? And my answer is, evil's insane. Yeah. Evil doesn't make sense. So I think there's a lot of illustrations in everyday life. I'm not talking about anybody personally. I'm using the you as a general you, or let's just say we know that if we continue taking drugs, it'll kill us. But people do it all the time. Mm-hmm. Evil is inherently self-destructive and finally irrational. So this is the final manifestation of the irrationality and the deceptiveness of evil, that they are attempting to overturn what they can't overturn.
Yes.
It makes no sense, but they're so full of rage and hate that they have this vain idea that somehow they can overturn evil. So I think that explains the battle. I'd like it because I think it's the most natural reading of Revelation 20. Satan's completely bound during this period until the end of the 1,000-year period. The resurrection is physical, but there's no unglorified saints in the millennium or the new creation. And I mean, it's a pretty simple view. Now, another person who holds this view is Eckhard Schnabel, who teaches New Testament at Gordon Conwell Seminary. Maybe you've heard of him.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I've been dying to ask you this. Did this view develop, Dr. Schreiner? When I thought of you maybe 10 years ago, I thought of you coming from a more millennial perspective. Is that fair? It's probably more nuanced than that, but I'm just trying to, kind of get a baseline established.
Did you say amillennial?
That's right.
Yes. That's what I said. I wrote a commentary on Revelation in the ESV Expository Commentary series. And in that commentary, I defended amillennialism. Yes. So my history is I was trained by dispensational premillennialists. I moved to historic premillennialism, and then I moved to amillennialism, and now I'm a new creation millennialist.
Yeah, no. May I say, Dr. Schreiner, that to me underscores your humility to say that, because you're just always open, right, to what the true spirit of the Reformation is, right, that the Word of God would continue to inform us and reform us. And I think my own agnosticism, it's probably not the best word, ambiguity might be a little more general on, eschatology and the millennium in particular, has made me a bit sheepish. But I'm wondering, in preparation for your new commentary, which is outstanding in the Baker exegetical commentary, because yours replaced Dr. Osborne, didn't it, Grant Osborne?
Yes, which I think is a very good commentary. They didn't replace him because they thought it was bad, because they don't think that.
Oh, sure.
The commentaries are replaced just because my commentary will be replaced because time passes. That was the only thing.
Yes, yeah. New scholarship, new insights to kind of refine. I'm curious, was it your preparation for this commentary that led you to this new creation millennial position, or almost which came first? Or was it just your continued study?
No, yes, totally.
Wow.
As I'm working on this commentary, I'm like, I come to Revelation 20 again, and I want to say, okay, what is this text saying? I don't want to just say what I said last time without thinking it through again.
Yes.
And as I came to it, I started saying, I don't think the amillennial view. So I really struggled. I said, I don't think the amillennial view is rightly interpreting chapter 20. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, but then the premillennial view has some problems. Now there's a scholar named Webb Mealy who wrote his dissertation on this and advocates this new creation millennial view. So he influenced me. However, he has some features of his view that I don't hold to. For example, he's an annihilationist.
Oh, of course.
Whenever people hear that I hold this view and they're familiar with subject, they immediately ask me if I'm an annihilationist. So I say, no, I don't hold to everything Webb Mealy holds to, but certainly his work on this and Eckhart Schnabel's work. And then a pastor I dialogued a lot with named Jeremy Sexton. They all influenced me. Jeremy was an enormous help. He emailed me about this, and we emailed back and forth a lot. So Jeremy played a big role in terms of influences on me, in terms of dialoguing. I had a lot of objections, and most of those objections I shared with Jeremy, but he and others convinced me. Interesting.
Well, I mean, the one thing, I don't know if I said this, Nathan, when we did the podcast a few months ago, but the weakest part of the amillennial position that most amillennialists admit to readily, that I found, I learned this all the way back in seminary, and several of my profs then would sort of say, yeah, this is a weakness, are the two resurrections in Revelation 20. Mm-hmm. And the only way to really sort of hold on to the amillennial distinction there is to make one of those non-physical, which I think is what you pointed out, Dr. Schreiner, right? And my old PCA pastor believed that the first resurrection is a description of the new birth. And he admitted to me, yeah, I could be wrong. You know what I mean? So the position that you're advocating definitely grapples. Would you say this is core to it, Dr. Schreiner, with the physicality, for lack of a better word, of both resurrections in Revelation 20?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's hard to say. Oh, the first resurrection is the intermediate state. Same word, next verse. The second resurrection's physical. And here's the other thing, that's the noun anastasis. But he also says they came to life. That's a verb, a zaison. They came to life and they reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Well, that same verb is used of Christ in chapter 1 and chapter 2.
Yes.
Of Christ coming to life and his resurrection. So, it's hard. It's hard, I think, to argue that the resurrection's only spiritual there.
Interesting. And could I ask you, I'm being mindful of our time. Boy, I wish we had 8 sessions with Dr. Schreiner on this, but can you explain, I'm going to give the fancy term and let you unpack it for the simpletons like me and Nathan, and not our audience, just you and me.
That's right.
We'll let them self-define the recapitulatory nature of Revelation, that you essentially see Revelation as repeating some things. But could you unpack that for us a little bit, introduce it? Because I suspect that's a new thought for a lot of people that are interested in studying the book of Revelation.
Yeah. So what we mean by recapitulation is that Revelation zooms to the end of history, and then it starts over again. So, for example, I argue in my commentary, the sixth seal at the end of Revelation 6 represents the end of the world. The world's over. It's the second coming. It's the day of the Lord. And then in chapter 7, he asks, who can stand on this great day? Well, it's those who are sealed, those who are redeemed. And at the end of chapter 7, they're in the new creation. He wipes every tear from their eye.
Yes.
So there's a sense in which he could end the book at the end of chapter 7. But then he starts over again. So we're at the end. He starts over again with the trumpets. But the seventh trumpet is the kingdom of the world have become the kingdoms of the Lord and of his Christ.
Yes.
And we will reign forever and ever. Well, that's the end of chapter 11. It's clearly the end again. So, the sixth seal is the end. The seventh trumpet is the end. Then we think of chapter 14. We have the two harvests. Well, those two harvests are clearly the end of history. So what we see is he keeps recapitulating the end, right? The seven bowls. Again, the seventh bowl says it is done. In fact, the sixth bowl is Armageddon. So I think all of the 7 bowls describe that final judgment. So recapitulation means he keeps taking us to the end. Then we have chapters 17, 18, 19 on the judgment of Babylon. Well, that's just another picture of the end.
Yes.
So what the author is doing, it's, if you think of a kaleidoscope, you take a kaleidoscope and you shake it, but you get a little different picture. So I think that's what he does. He gives us one image picture of the end. He shakes the kaleidoscope and says, let's do it again. Let's look at it from another angle. And then he shakes the kaleidoscope and says, let's look at it from another angle. So that's a very effective way to communicate.
Yes.
So the mistake we can make is to think, Revelation just goes step by step, sequentially over what's going to happen every chapter. No, he zooms to the end and then he starts over again. That's recapitulation.
Yes. So I'm curious, when you preached at the church, now you said that may have been 15 to 20 years ago. Does that capture essentially your view of the book when you were preaching back then?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So, because in that sense, I'm closer to, that's why I said I'm a combination. It's closer to the all-millennial type readings, right?
Yes.
So yeah. Yes, so that's totally what I argued. But actually, see, in that sermon series, I ended up being premillennial.
Wow. I love this, Dr. Schreiner, because here's where it helps guys like me. I'm sure you would say the same, Nathan, right? Yeah. To go after these issues in Scripture.
Yeah.
You don't have to say it, Dr. Schreiner. You're not going to say it. You're too humble. But we know the brain power. It's an old cliche, but Dr. Schreiner has already forgotten more than you and I, Nathan, probably combined will ever learn, let alone have learned. So it's an odd comfort to me when I hear men who esteem the Bible as God's word, as divinely inspired, sufficient, devoted their entire lives to the study of the Scripture, and are continuing as they look at Scripture to have their positions tweaked, challenged, modify. Have you found because you've got quite a few scholarly friends in your circle, Dr. Schreiner, that have you been able to find in spirit of edification among scholars that take a different tact? And I'm just curious, when you interact with them, do you sort of major on the minors? Do you sharpen each other? I'd just love to get your personal sense of what that's been like for you from a spiritual growth standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm presenting my position at ETS this fall. So I haven't been in a public forum, but I have been, with my other views. And I've been in friendly discussions where we've disagreed, and they have been friendly.
Yes.
It has not been, I haven't been in contexts where it's been polemical or people have gotten angry.
Yeah.
I've been in contexts where, we talk and we share, but it's fine. We're all friends with each other, but we'll disagree, Mm-hmm. So
yeah, that's like I said, encouraging to me. It might sound strange, but I find sometimes not having certainty on a distinction, recognizing, oh my goodness, this brother disagrees on this minor point. God has an answer. We know that. We will, I assume, discover this is what it was. And he's not ambiguous about it, but our finite minds trying to take this in, it's really something. Nathan and I were talking before the podcast, wondering, you've kind of hinted at it, or maybe done even a little more than hinting, but it might be good as we kind of move towards wrapping up. Could you mention what you think are benefits to younger believers? A lot of folks in our church are pretty new in their faith, which is exciting, just to see people begin to learn what it means to walk with God and, pursue Christ in their daily lives. And, the book of Revelation, obviously, dragons and beasts rising from the sea and these incredibly powerful and at times daunting images. What benefit do you see Revelation preached carefully, pastorally? What benefits does that bring to young believers as you see it, Dr. Schreiner?
Yeah, I mean, I think young believers recognize even more keenly. I'm thinking young in age too, but I guess they're not all young in age. But I do think younger people perhaps feel more sharply than that we are more alienated from our culture as Christians than was true maybe 30, 40 years ago. So I think they sense, wow, we're sojourners and aliens, to use First Peter's language. I mean, that's what Revelation is about. And Revelation isn't we hate the world, right? Obviously, he's not saying that. But he is saying there's hope. Are we a minority that is? Are we crazy? Are we just this weird cult out there? No, we're the true people of God. God rules over this world, and we give ourselves to Him, and we give ourselves to one another with great hope and optimism. We are victors ultimately. We will conquer. We will reign with Christ. And that's all encouraging us to keep trusting in Jesus every day, keep hoping in Him every day, keep obeying Him, to forsake the temptations to throw our lot in with the world. So I would say young and old believers, we need hope. I mean, you can't live without hope. If you lose hope, then everything's going to collapse.
Beautifully said.
That's great.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Schreiner. We really appreciate the time that you've taken. This has been so great. I know I echo what Greg said. If we could have you on for another 8 sessions, that would be amazing. And I know that we wouldn't even begin to touch the surface of your knowledge and wisdom when it comes to the Bible and looking at passages. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate that. We do unfortunately have to sign off now.
And can I say one thing, Nathan, before we go?
Yes.
We are, and you might do this in some other promos, but your outstanding commentary in the newest version in the Baker Exegetical Series, which we've talked a lot about. I did want to ask you really quick, if I can get this in. How long did it take you to write that? I have to know, Dr. Schreiner. I'm curious.
It was probably 3 or 4 years, but COVID, COVID really helped.
Of course. Yeah, you had all that time.
I was suddenly, I wouldn't have finished it when I did if it weren't for COVID, but suddenly I was just home, kind of isolated, as all of us were. So, I finished it a little faster because of that.
Wow. Yeah, 3 or 4 years. I mean, Revelation. Wow. So now, of course, Dr. Schreiner, because of this podcast, I'm going to have to rethink my entire preaching schedule. And who knows? Maybe we'll see what the future holds. Nathan's still holding out hope. But we are going to give away, Nathan, a copy of Dr. Schreiner's commentary, and maybe we can put that in the post or communicate that however you want. But it is a rich resource for somebody that really wants to do a good study in the book to explain some of the symbols. And I just love the generous way you interact with scholarship throughout the commentary, Dr. Schreiner, where you're very respectful of those. Like you said, you'll tell the reader, hey, this is why I disagree and I see it differently. But it's just very, very illuminating for people. And I think whoever gets it is going to be quite happy.
So in order to get that, we are going to ask our listeners to write a review on your favorite listening platform and review specifically this podcast
Please.
you heard with Dr. Schreiner. Let us know your thoughts on that. And you have 1 week from the release of this podcast. So 1 week from the release of the podcast to get your review in. I will be checking those. And again, specifically about this episode with Dr. Schreiner. So
yes,
that's it.
Again, Dr. Schreiner, thank you so much. It was incredibly valuable for us.
Great to be with you, Greg and Nathan, and God bless.
Thank
yes,
you.
You too.
Until the next time, we just rock the Casbah. Thank you again for listening to These Go to 11, an unchurchy conversation about everyday faith. Once again, please make sure you like, subscribe, and review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you ever find yourself in the Forest Hill, Maryland area, please feel free to stop by at 135 Industry Lane, and you can get all of our service times and information at christfc.org.
These Go to 11